Wow. I'm not really sure how to start this one. This movie came out of the gate in such a weird place. Forget about the fact that making a movie about Barbie of all things was kind of a bizarre idea anyway, but it was in development for years, had a bunch of very different iterations where people were really confused about what kind of movie it was and couldn't agree on it. Amy Schumer was going to star in it at one point. Eventually, years later, we finally wind up with this version, and it seems like the people who made it are still confused, on the surface at least. You've got the cast saying it's a feminist movie, while some executive at Mattel is insisting that it's not a feminist movie. I imagine because there's at least one person at Mattel who likes making money, so they can't get on the same page. Then there's the actors doing interviews saying asinine stuff like this and this, turning the whole thing into an insufferable political shit show focusing on gender roles and ideological whatever instead of just telling us what the fucking movie is about. Then the mainstream critics start chiming in and showering the movie with adoration, saying how amazing it is, while everything we can see with our own two eyes is telling us the exact opposite. And you don't have to look back too far to see what tends to happen whenever there's a big schism like that between the critics and the audience. So I thought I had a pretty good idea of what to expect before I saw this thing, was only seeing it to review it. I thought it looked incredibly stupid, the trailers weren't helping at all, but there was a bit in one of them that I thought was interesting. The bit how, if you love Barbie, this movie is for you, and if you hate Barbie, this movie is for you. Okay. Yeah, that seems like a smart way to approach this if you don't want to exclude anybody. Remember that for later. But I have no strong feelings about Barbie one way or the other, so what kind of movie am I in for? Because if it's like what the actors are saying, you can keep that shit. How many times do we have to watch that same story play out, where they load up the movie with politics and feminism and all this other hot garbage, all the critics praise it till they're blue in the balls, and then the movie tanks because what people in the Hollywood bubble think is good really isn't to those of us in the real world. So it sure did seem like everything was lining up perfectly for this movie to be absolutely DOA, and then I go to the theater and the shows before and after mine are sold out. People are cosplaying as Barbie and Ken, they're applauding during the movie, like what the f*** is going on here? That really threw me off, because having seen it now, there's no denying what kind of movie this is, and I thought people had wised up to this shit. So I don't know what the trick was exactly, but I know this. Barbie is everything the actors said it was, but not in the way I thought. And if you think that's confusing, I don't blame you, because this movie wanted you to be confused. Partially, I guess, because it's trying to be so many different things. It's trying to be a comedy, a satire, a self-aware deconstruction of what Barbie means as a toy, as an idea of what Barbie is supposed to mean to people and to the world from the perspective of Barbie versus what it means in reality. But on top of that, it's also trying to be some insidious meta commentary about feminism and gender roles and how Barbie and Ken have become these weirdly shaped pieces that don't fit the socio-political puzzle like they thought they did because everything is so much more complicated than they always believed. There's a lot here. Way more than you'd think in a movie about a fucking doll that got lampooned on The Simpsons because of how vapid and lame it is. And frankly, if the movie had been more like that, I would have felt a lot better about it. But it wasn't. And I'll say this, no matter how stupid this movie might look on the surface, no matter how stupid you might think it is, it isn't. It's not some silly, harmless, fish-out-of-water comedy about a doll that comes to the real world and has a wacky adventure. That was a trick played on you by the marketing campaign. It's actually a lot smarter than that. I know what you're thinking, but keep in mind, I didn't say good. I said smart, and as it turns out, sometimes those can be very different things. Now, don't get me wrong. Ultimately, Barbie is pretty much what most of us thought it would be, but you wouldn't get what we have here if there wasn't some kind of real intelligence behind it. So the movie may be a feminist ideologue shitstorm, but the people behind it are a lot craftier than we're used to, which is why I think they fooled a lot of moviegoers into believing that it's not as insulting as it is.
I'm so confused.
These are confusing times.
In the spirit of remaining unbiased, I'll start with some positives. The best thing about the movie is the set and costume design. Barbie's home, I don't know if you could have made a dollhouse come to life any better. It may not be for you, it may not be for me, but if Barbie world, Barbie land, Barbie's dream house, whatever the hell it is, if it were a real place, then yeah, that's probably what it would look like. And they made real-life versions of every different Barbie you could possibly think of. Beats me if all those were real dolls or not, but if they were, that's good attention to detail, I guess. Also, the cast was good. The material they were given was pretty offensive, but none of them were phoning it in, which is a plus. And whether you love it or hate it, you can't say the movie doesn't know who its audience is. So girls or women who grew up playing with Barbies that made them think they could do anything or be anyone they wanted to be, except for a mom or a wife apparently, will likely be happier than pigs in shit watching this thing. Everyone else, though... This is more complicated than it sounds, because the movie does have a few interesting concepts that they use to disguise it as something else, but those concepts just end up getting buried under layer after layer of mean-spirited feminist ideological propaganda bullshit. So without me even saying anything, you already know what the movie is about. You know who the villain is, and you know what all the male characters are worth. So imagine being a little boy, and your mom or your older sister or whoever brings you to see this movie with them. What kind of message are we sending to that kid? You are terrible just for existing. You have no value as a person. You don't deserve respect or dignity. Girls are better than you at everything, and you would destroy your whole society if you were ever given any sort of real power. That's what the movie is saying. Holy shit! Any parent out there who gives even one single crap about your kids, for God's sake, do not let your son or frankly your daughter see Barbie, because this movie could really f those kids up. There are terrible ideas in this thing that no child should be exposed to, whether you're a girl or a boy. And that's a good place to start with the film's treatment of boys. There is not one male character in this thing who is seen in a positive light. Not one. The men are one-dimensional assholes, simps, effeminate, useless, complete idiots, borderline sexual predators, and so on and so on. I mean, you know how this goes by now. The agenda is not subtle. It's never fucking subtle. And when we enter Barbie world, it's portrayed as some kind of idyllic feminist utopia where the Barbies run everything, do every important job, occupy every position of power, and the Kens are just there, do exactly nothing except simp for Barbie, and are treated like a big joke. The only one who even has an asterisk next to his name is Ryan Gosling Ken, because he's the only one with a storyline. The problem is, it's Ken, so the storyline is literally how no one gives a shit about him except how and when he's attached to Barbie. And since it's a feminist movie, Barbie doesn't give a shit about him either. And the moment that Ken starts wanting to have a little respect, a little acknowledgement that he's actually worth something, worth anything, it's immediately portrayed as the worst thing in the world. And I think you know where I'm going with this. Yeah, Ken really gravitates toward that patriarchy thing, because for the first time in his entire existence, something is actually about him. For the first time in his entire existence, someone is telling him that he matters as a person and deserves respect. Now, silly me, I don't see why any of those are bad things, but the movie sure as hell thinks they are, and even if Ken's storyline is supposedly about him learning that he has some kind of value, it really isn't. Even that is done by lecturing us about the evil of the patriarchy, so forgive me, filmmakers, if your good intentions with Ken, I'm sure, were lost in the translation here. And you can't put that one on me. If you were really coming from a genuine place here, one would think that the end goal of this movie would be for the Barbies and the Kens to become equals, all of whom have value and are entitled to the same decency and the same respect, and transform their Barbie world society into something that treats everyone with fairness despite their differences, but it isn't. It just goes back to the same way it was before, with all the Barbies sitting at the table and the Kens getting a few crumbs thrown to them once in a while that they think is a meal because they're fucking idiots who believe that a shit sandwich is all they deserve. And it doesn't stop there, because it's not just the Kens, it's not just men in general. The movie also has a really negative outlook on parenthood, marriage, and relationships. Like, there are jokes about how the pregnant Barbie got discontinued because no no one gave a shit, ha ha ha. There's a 2001 parody of all things where little girls are destroying their baby dolls because, God forbid, any of them ever want to procreate or have a family. Gee, I wonder what all this could mean. There's this other character Barbie encounters in the real world who has a daughter, and she cares about her daughter in a you're my kid and I have to kind of a way, but wow. Being a mother is never portrayed as something that brings any joy into her life at all. It's just one more thing that she has to put up with on top of all the innumerable awful things that men do, up to and including apparently not pulling out in time. And the daughter is this insufferable little shit too. She's every stereotypical tweenage Gen Z activist twat you've ever seen, spouting idiopolitical feminist nonsense that she doesn't even understand. And the woman does technically have a husband, but the movie gives so few shits about him she might as well be a widow. I guess the whole institution of marriage, kids, and family is just radioactive as far as Barbie is concerned. So congratulations, Greta Gerwig. When you're in your 50s, alone, a proud mom to 10 cats, and your only long-term relationship is with a guy who runs on AA batteries, we can all point to this movie and say we saw that coming. Hats off to ya. But see, here's where the feminist dipshit scumbags who made this are being a little craftier than we're used to. Because believe it or not, they are self-aware enough to understand how toxic this is. Sure, they wear that toxicity like a badge of honor, though maybe not out in the open, but they understand that the women who are this movie's audience have husbands and boyfriends and brothers and sons, and we'd like to get their money too. So why don't we take all this non-stop man-hate, all this rampant, ridiculous misandry, and cleverly disguise it with some kind of bullshit positive message that we can spin as something non-toxic. Then we can have it both ways. We get to shit all over men, but we also get to say that we're on their side and that we're doing them a big favor so we don't drive them off. And that's why Ken gets the asterisks. The movie wants you to think that Ken achieves escape velocity by the end of this thing, but he doesn't. He gets the same treatment as the other men. He may be the only male character with an arc, but the message is the same for all of them. Women don't want you, women don't need you, and just because women might begrudgingly agree to give you a tiny fraction of the basic respect afforded to every other living creature, don't ever think for a second that it means women are not smarter and better than you in every way. Do we really have to do this bit right now? Jesus Christ. So basically, the movie spends 2 hours vilifying men, trivializing men, looking down on men, making it clear that women don't need men. Then in the last 5 minutes, it gives men the slightest acknowledgement possible and acts like it's serving them a feast just so all the husbands and boyfriends who got dragged to see this piece of shit don't march out of the theater and demand their money back. And the really baffling part, judging by the box office and the crowd in my theater, is that a lot of people actually seem to be falling for this. Don't ask me how. So, short version, the movie hates men and everything they stand for, but the Kens get their own musical number, and that's supposed to make it okay. Spoiler, it doesn't. Now, all that being said, the movie isn't so up its own ass that it can't make fun of itself. So there's a lot of self-referential humor about how inherently dumb this whole situation is. Ironically, those are some of the jokes that actually work, but that gets drowned out by the countless potshots they take at the patriarchy, capitalism, anyone with a Y chromosome, and what a waste of time romantic relationships are. So no, they don't get any points for that. And even after all this, the movie still thinks there's something deep and profound to be explored here. This is one of those concepts I mentioned earlier. They think they're weaving some insightful, magnificent grand tale about the nature of Barbie and how she relates to the world, where Barbie starts out thinking she means one thing and then finally decides that she wants to mean something else. And I guess it's more thought-provoking than you'd expect in a movie where Ken learns about the patriarchy in a fucking middle school library, but if it works on any level, it's only because Margot Robbie is a good actor, and because there's a small part of Greta Gerwig that apparently thought she was making some kind of weird Oscar bait with all this, so maybe she shouldn't play the I hate men card in every single scene, and just for a minute or two, try to make something that's not completely insufferable. And strangely enough, in the brief moments moments when that happens, you get these tiny glimpses of something that could have been more poignant here. And that's why, even though I do truly hate this movie, I feel kind of conflicted about it. It's such a bizarre mishmash where you've got a project that is unapologetically feminist agenda driven, but it's made by filmmakers who are actually talented, and in addition to shoving their agenda so far up our ass that we could floss our teeth with it, they also wanted to make a good movie. I think. So they want to scream from the mountaintops about how much they despise men, but they also throw the men just enough of a bone to fool them into thinking they don't, because they know that telling half the audience this movie isn't for them is not good business. In other words, Barbie flirts with the idea of being a less bad movie, while at the same time being stupidly sexist, and simultaneously smart enough to not want you to realize how sexist it is. Then of course you peel that shit away, and you get all this other subtle as a heart attack messaging stuff. Don't get married, don't have kids, relationships are pointless, patriarchy is the devil. If ever there was a man on the Supreme Court, the entire world would instantly dissolve into chaos, and all of that is somehow a batshit vehicle for a meta commentary about a plastic doll learning the meaning of life in the form of a punchline about a fucking gynecologist. So yeah, there's a lot here. This movie disguises itself as some bright, cheerful, innocent, family-friendly comedy that celebrates everything women and Barbie are about. But behind the curtain is a mean, spiteful, angry film that despises traditional gender roles, hates masculinity in all its forms, and treats men with nothing but contempt. The surprising thing is that it tried to disguise itself in the first place. I guess because the filmmakers were reading the room and realized that if they wanted to get men into the theaters for a movie like this, they had to start playing 4D chess. And the marketing campaign was actually kind of brilliant, because it did everything under the sun to hide what kind of movie this really was, and from what I can see, a lot of people are falling for it. So in the end, here's my takeaway from all this. This is an aggressively, toxically, vehemently feminist movie that has ideas and ambitions about being more than a feminist movie. And as depressing as it is, their target audience of Barbie fans, women, and weak-willed, impressionable, testosterone-deficient men who have no self-esteem or sadly just don't know any better will probably eat this up with a spoon. There was an older dude in my theater who walked out of that building talking about how he couldn't wait to go home and play with dolls. So whatever black magic the filmmakers were casting here, it worked. I don't know why. Maybe because we've gotten so conditioned to expect totally in-your-face, blatantly petty juvenile crap when it comes to feminist projects like Batwoman or She-Hulk or whatever else, that when one comes along that's made by someone who's trying to think one or two steps ahead, it catches us off guard. So if there's a lesson to be learned here, it's that if Barbie is any indication, feminist movies aren't getting less insufferable, they're not getting better, they're just getting more sophisticated with their awfulness. God help us all, Barbie, and this movie. Thanks so much for watching. While you're here, do all the other YouTube things. Ding the bell icon and follow my social media so you can always be notified when I upload new stuff. The links are down there. And I'm trying to get to 50,000 subscribers before the end of the year. So most importantly, don't forget to hit that thumbs up, leave a comment, share the video, subscribe, and make sure you're still subscribed, because what really deserves to be brainwashed into playing with dolls by a movie that hates him and thinks he doesn't deserve respect, dignity, or any sort of power whatsoever is the YouTube algorithm. That's all for now. I'll be back with more soon. Take care, stay tuned. I'll see you next time.